Tonight we begin a new recurring series on World Focus that we call the Chinese Century, a series meant to explore that country's vast and growing influence around the world. A story published in today's Washington Post speaks to China's rapidly growing clout. It said that China has now surpassed Japan as the U.S. government's largest creditor, owning at least 10% of all U.S. debt, perhaps as much as $700 billion. That potentially gives the Chinese tremendous leverage over the United States. Here to talk more about that possibility is Brad Setser of the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Setser, thanks for being with us again. Bluntly, I think the question for many Americans is China buying influence in this country? Could they have sway over decisions made by the United States Congress?
Well, they can certainly have an influence over U.S. policies, but in order to exercise influence, there has to be a credible threat that China would stop purchasing as much debt or start selling some of its debt if the U.S. didn't respect China's policy wishes. I think the only real example we have where China's actually exercised a bit of influence was when the debate about Freddie and Fannie came up, because China, in addition to holding an ungodly large number of treasuries, probably has about $500 billion of Freddie and Fannie debt, and they really wanted those institutions to be bailed out.
Well, could it have a chilling impact? In other words, if the Chinese don't directly influence, that American policymakers might say, well, this could upset the Chinese, we better think of a different way.
Any U.S. policymaker will have to evaluate whether a given policy course risks triggering a reaction inside China. So that doesn't mean you necessarily change policy. It just means you have to consider the possibility.
You're aware of it?
You are.
If we're uncomfortable with the level of debt that China owns, who are the other people out there potentially who could buy it, and would they be any more appealing to us?
Well, I think realistically right now, given that oil prices have gone down so much, the big buyers of U.S. debt are going to be in Asia, and they're going to be China and Japan. The option is not probably selling it to someone else. The option is having a world where the U.S. doesn't rely so much on foreign investors to finance our economy, which would imply we have to consume a lot less, and China also would have to consume more at home. So there'd be some changes on both sides of the Pacific.
In other words, if we aren't comfortable with it, the changes should be made in this country.
I think you cannot
elsewhere.
Just have changes in the U.S. It has to be changes on both sides. The U.S. will have to change, but China also has to change. I mean, China's accumulation of U.S. debt is a reflection of an exceptionally high savings rate, too high a savings rate, and too low a level of consumption inside China. So you got to have changes on both sides are necessary.
Brad Setser, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Very much so.